on WBNE.
Hello, and welcome to episode 184, all about the Lord of the Rings appendices, Appendix A, being the 184th part of That's What I'm Tolkien About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC. I've been experiencing the world of J.R.R. Tolkien for the first time, and this week we are continuing our dive into the Lord of the Rings appendices and finally finishing Appendix A. Today I'm joined by Justin, better known as Freddie's roommate on TikTok. Welcome, Justin!
Hello! I've risen from the dead. I am back. Haha. See, I saw all your comments, but now I'm back. You're never getting rid of me. I'm just kidding.
Context for the listener: there was a bit of a identity crisis in the Zoom this morning, where for somehow two Justins, two profiles got logged onto the Zoom, and we didn't know who was the real Justin and who was his evil twin. But by that introduction, it would seem that the evil twin survived. So.
Oh no! Of course, no. I'm the real Justin. All I want to do is podcast and find out about Earth's defense system. It's fine. Don't worry about me. I'm fine.
That's spoken like a real, true, non-evil Justin. So today we are doing the last section of Appendix A. So yeah. for a month ago where I thought I will do one episode on all of the Lord of the Rings appendices, and then here we are 4 episodes into just Appendix A. But this section is on Durin's folk. You're making a face, what?
Man, I was a little worried about you with Rings of Power being 2 years away, but at this rate, whew, man, you'll have plenty of content, plenty of appendices. You'll be all right.
Yeah, I'll just do the appendices until the next Rings of Power season. Shouldn't get boring at all. This section is specifically on the dwarves, and I was like, I want to get on someone who is excited to talk about dwarves. And every time you've come on, we've talked about the dwarves.
Yeah, they deserve justice.
Yes, yeah. And we had some, not like a debate or anything, but there was a point in the Rings of Power show you brought up about like whether or not Elrond purposefully lost that axe picking contest. And then later on in the series, it is revealed that he did like purposefully lose, and like what that says about how he views dwarves and how the show views dwarves. And anyway, we've had some like really fun conversations about dwarves.
Okay, you know what? Let's get into it. This is what you're paying for, dear listener. I know you're
it's free.
Like eating this, like listening to this, whether you're eating breakfast or eating lunch, or whatever, or driving to work. Listen, I want you to listen very carefully, because I liked Rings of Power for the most part, but God, can the dwarves be good at something? Just let them be good. Let them be the best at something. No matter if they try to smash rocks. Turns out Elrond can smash it better. Oh no. Oh, are they good fighters? Well, Legolas is climbing up elephants' trunks or whatever. Like, can they have a special ability? One special ability? Like, any of them at all? Like, oh my gosh, they're stuck with like trumpet ear thing, the trumpet ear guy and stuff like that. Like, come on. Let them be good. Let them. What's the word I'm looking for? It's gotten to a point. Maybe it's just the adaptations of it all. You know what I mean? Like if they're not good at anything, they're not the best builders. They're not the best whatever. You know what I mean? Remember in Rings of Power when they were like, "Oh, we don't even need the dwarves. We'll just take the thing for ourselves.
Yeah, we'll just do it ourselves."
Like, can't we have some collaboration? Isn't that in the nature
Which
of the books?
I still don't feel good about that moment where Durin had given Elrond that like sample of the mithril, and then when they failed to get the dwarves' permission, Elrond was like, "Oh, let's just use this," and I'm like, doesn't that go against like what you were trying to do? Anyway, I'm texting you this meme right now, and I laughed so hard when I saw it.
Oh no. Okay. Dwarves, elves, better than being better than humans. Elves watching. Oh, too soon.
But isn't that so true? That's so this meme. Actually, it was posted in the That's What I'm Talking About Facebook group, which is kind of the forgotten child of my of my doing, where I had too many social media platforms to keep up with, and I kind of forget about Facebook. I'm so sorry. But a lot of times people do share some fun stuff there. And one of them was this meme where it's like two guys like shaking hands, and it's being better than men, dwarves and elves. And then afterwards, it's the elves washing their hands. And that's really what it feels like a lot of the times, is that the dwarves really get this like stepchild treatment from, I won't even say from the fandom, because I think the fandom, there are a lot of people who really love the dwarves and like to, do them justice and talk passionately about them. But by the like source material, I tweeted something about like, hey, who loves dwarves and wants to talk about them? And someone replied, well, not Tolkien. Don't get Tolkien on.
Gosh,
and I was like,
Jesus.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's accurate. That does kind of remind me, there is a little bit of some stereotyping with the dwarves on Tolkien's part that he later tried to rectify after certain major world events in the 1930s and 40s.
Yes.
To distance himself from some of those stereotypes of the dwarves. But if you're really curious about it, there was an episode of Potterless where Mike Schubert had on a guest, and they talked a lot about anti-Semitism in fantasy, and a lot of that has to start, it kind of starts with Tolkien and the dwarves. So just kind of putting that out there for this episode. But the dwarves kind of get this very sad treatment from the source.
It is crazy to me that all these other fantasy races are ripe for reinterpretation. Like, there are a million different types of elves with different personalities, different like loves and things like that and all this stuff. But dwarves have remained the exact same archetype through ever since. Like, I think just reading through Durin's Folk and just the history of the dwarves in general, damn, Tolkien really, like, from full court not nailed it, but like cemented the depiction of the dwarves to like this day. There has not been a like not creative. I don't want to, maybe there's a book out there that I haven't read or whatever, so don't get me wrong. But like in popular culture, the Tolkien dwarves are the dwarves. Point blank, period. Like, even, have you played God of War?
I have not, no.
Yeah, okay, so the new God of War game, there's two dwarves right there. And one of them is blue, but it still acts like a Tolkien dwarf. Like, I have a beard, and I build stuff, and all this stuff. And he has a brother who also builds stuff. But I'm the clean dwarf, you know what I mean? But, like, even today, they're still making the exact, in Norse mythology. And
I'd say, like, by and large, they almost always have a Scottish accent.
Yeah, like a gruff, like, mostly a Scottish accent, gruff and all that stuff. And even when we go back to, because dwarves, correct me if I'm wrong, but dwarves are like come from Norse mythology. Even when we go back to the source of it, you know what I mean? Or telling stories about Norse mythology, they still act like Tolkien dwarves. And like, dang, JRR.
So man. What, a question for you then, if you were creating your own piece of fantasy right now, or maybe not even fantasy, maybe you're putting the dwarves in a rom-com. How would you like reinvent the dwarves, or what's like a different like interpretation that you would depict dwarves as?
It's like, here's the thing, they are cemented in the earth, like, pun intended a little bit. They are cemented in the mountain. They will always be builders, and like they also have like maybe like a fighter streak to them. They're always building armor. They're always fighting something. They're always trying to take something back. Is there a world, like, if I was like not redoing, but like if I was in the writing room of Rings of Power, right? And we don't get to see really Khazad-dûm like in all of its full glory, right? Is there a way to bend that to they are the scientist of Middle Earth, if that makes any sense?
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we haven't seen this place before. It fell, like in its greatest glory. You know what I mean? Is there a world where like this is don't like this is exaggerating. Remember in Atlantis when they had the flying stonefish?
Yes.
Why don't they have like flying
Atlantis dwarf crossover?
Yes, because they're so cemented in earth and fire and stuff like that. Is there a world where maybe it's under a waterfall where they like use water or something, or a different element or something, or even on the top of the mountain use air or something? Maybe. What do you think? Is that a dumb answer?
No, that's not a dumb answer at all. And like, I think this is I think you bring up like a really fun point that can lead to a lot of like creative discussions about like what else can we do with dwarves? Because you are right that so many other like fantasy tropes and peoples are always being reinvented. But yeah, dwarves are almost always this like stubborn, hardy type of people. Even if dwarves were the forgotten stepchild of Middle Earth, I still think he created a very like commendable group of people with a lot of like really fantastic qualities for like fantasy worlds and plots, you know? So maybe there's a reason that people haven't tried to recreate this. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know, kind of a mentality. And so I think there's like a, you know, just playing like devil's advocate here.
Okay, here's the thing. I'm not saying they're broken or like they how do I say? Bad saying
like wanting to see a new interpretation doesn't mean that we don't like what originally happened. It's just like, you know, it's like 80 years later, let's do something new. I totally understand that.
Like, I mean, this is gonna sound like dumb. I hope it's not dumb, but I think there's versions of dwarves in all types of different stories of like, I guess, a role of kind of like a side character that is supposed to contrast the world around them, or has knowledge of the world or cultural knowledge of the world as the main character doesn't have. Like, I guess tinfoil hat theory right now. Like, not theory, but like put your tinfoil. I
know what you mean.
Ron Weasley fills the role of a dwarf, but he's not a dwarf. You know what I'm trying to say?
You know what? No, you're so correct with that, because I also think a lot of his personality is also very like this like stubbornness in him.
And he's redheaded. And he has a bunch of family. But like that fills the cultural role. Ron Weasley, when he's done right, fulfills that cultural knowledge that Hermione and Harry don't have. When I think of Star Wars, I think Finn is the dwarf of the group. He has cultural knowledge of the enemy that Rey and Poe don't have. He's like, no, we have to go. You know, I think that role is fulfilled. They're just not dwarves. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Makes tons of sense. Totally see what you're saying there. So let's dive into this section now and see more of this history of the dwarves. Okay, so I'll set the scene for listeners who maybe don't remember, or people who didn't listen to the Silmarillion episodes. I don't know why. I'm just curious if there are listeners out there, like, why would you, or maybe you're just coming in now as a listener. I don't know. I just think it's funny where you're like, no, I'm not going to listen to the Silmarillion episodes, but I do want to listen to 4 episodes on Appendix A.
The best one.
Anyway, for people who maybe don't remember or haven't read the Silmarillion, dwarves. Okay, so let me go back even further. So the god of Middle Earth, so to speak, Eru or Iluvatar, decided that they were going to be his 2 quote-unquote children, which were elves and men. And the demigods of Middle Earth, the Valar, there's one named Aule, and he is like the crafter demigod. And one day he makes dwarves. Like he makes dwarves, makes like a whole race of people. Iluvatar God finds out and is like, bro, that's not supposed to happen. We're supposed to build this earth, and then I'm going to bring elves into it. And then after that, I'm going to bring men. Dwarves are not supposed to be here. This is not a part of my plan. And Aule is like, okay, you're right. I made a mistake. And he goes to destroy the elves. He goes to destroy the dwarves, his own creation, who he is viewing like as his children. And like as he's lifting his hammer, Iluvatar then steps in again and says, no, I don't want you to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to freeze them in time, and then I will awaken them when I deem it right for them to come into this world. And so that's how the dwarves were created and came to be on Middle Earth. So kind of like their roots are really, literally like made and set in stone. A lot of what we're talking about of like their stereotypes like throughout fantasy and stuff of being like they're literally set in stone. And so that's, I think, why. And also Aule being like the crafter, the dwarves kind of look at him as like, he's our dad. So that's how the dwarves become the like mining, crafter, builder people in Middle Earth. That's setting the stage.
Yeah.
Like 5 minutes later. So Durin's folk, this section of Appendix A, picks up with Durin the Deathless, which sounds dope. Like,
incredible name. Like,
yeah.
Bravo, Tolkien. You like knew what you were talking about sometimes. Damn. Crazy to think.
He knew what he was Tolkien about.
Hey! Get out. Get out. Canceled.
Ends the episode. Okay, so Durin the Deathless there are these 7 lead families of the dwarves, and Durin's folk is like the most important of these 7 families. And notice I'm saying 7. Just bear that in mind. Bear that in mind for later.
Oh no. No,
it's nothing bad. It's just okay, I don't know why I'm like the 7 rings. 7 rings for the dwarves. Yeah, there you go.
Of course.
There you go. Yeah. So Durin's folk is like the big family, the main family, and they're the ones that establish Khazad-dûm and get it to be in its, heyday. Unfortunately, this section doesn't talk, but maybe also fortunately, it doesn't talk a lot about Durin the Fourth from Rings of Power.
Yeah.
So in Rings of Power, anyone who's been watching, King Durin is Durin the Third, and Prince Durin, the one that we all love, who's married to Disa, and they're low-key like the best part of the show. Mm-hmm. He is the 4th, and this section it like establishes Durin the Deathless, saying like, oh, he lived for such a long time, even though dwarves are not immortal like elves. They do still have this lengthened and strengthened lifespan compared to men. And then it like skips down to Durin the 6th. So we're skipping over Durin the 4th. So I kind of wish we learned a little bit more about him, but also maybe as enjoyers of the show, it leaves a little bit up to question for us to watch the show unfold for this character, where it's like, oh, we don't know what's going to happen with, we kind of know, sadly, what the end is, but we don't know what the middle is,
Okay, are we spoiling Rings of Power right now? All of it? Or
yeah, I guess like general spoilers for Rings of Power, but also like a lot of this is just conjecture because the show has there are certain points where it veers off course from the quote unquote source material.
Yeah. Are these appendices, like, how in like other fantasy shows that are currently going on at the same time as Rings of Power, is this text?
Are you referring to House of Dragon?
No, I would never. But is this text actually what happened, or is it a recounting of what happened?
I know, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because maybe, like, what if we don't know this person writing this text right now? It doesn't know what happened Durin the Fourth, because maybe he went to the Undying Lands or something. Like, he did some adventures with Elrond in between, and then he came back to the mountain, and then Durin's Bane, yada yada yada. What would you consider? Is this actual factual text?
I know. Well, that's the thing. We kind of don't know. So the appendix are written, I think it's written by Merry and Pippin. I think it's maybe even just Pippin is like taking these notes and writing it down. And I think it mentions that Gimli supplied a lot of the information in the quote unquote Red Book, which is where the appendices would have been written. So this is all by Gimli's account. So I think that's also kind of why like we're focusing on Durin's folk, because Durin's folk is Gimli's family. And we're not hearing about like the 6 other families of dwarves and like what were they up to? Where did they go?
That makes sense because like I do this thing in my Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. One of them just ended. But how I tell my players that when you hear like I asked the merchant a question, that is his perspective of an answer. Like you know what I mean? If he says like, oh, like tell me about the knights of the capital city, yada yada yada, the merchant's gonna be like, they're undefeated. They are invincible. They can never like die or whatever. They're undying. Are they? When they're like just guys in gold armor. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Is this a case of, as we're reading this, like, was Durin actually deathless? Was he? Did he live?
Or was it? Yeah. Or was it just? Because also
Gimli
by the time, yeah, exactly. By the time like Gimli is relaying all of this information, Durin the First, Durin the Deathless, is someone who is held up, is almost like, you know, folklore to him. And yeah, like legend, like something of a legend in his people. And that's why Durin is like, then that's why it's like Durin the Third, Durin the Sixth, like it continues on because it says that when a dwarf in his line was born, that was like thought to emulate Durin the Deathless. That's why they chose his name to be continued on, because he was such a legend in this like ancestry. So it very well could be that like Durin the First was just like a regular guy and like
a regular guy who did some cool stuff one time,
just like a regular king, you know, but maybe like his son held him in such reverence that he told these stories that made him up to be this really fantastic leader of this people. And then that's how he got. So you're totally right that this is all up to interpretation of like, this is like what Gimli is saying and Gimli is talking about. So how do we know what Gimli knows is quote unquote true? I think that leaves a lot of interesting territory for the Rings of Power show.
Well, I'm wondering why readers of Tolkien give that leeway to the stories of the world, but won't give that leeway to Rings of Power.
To the show, yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's because it's a lot of things, you know? Let's be honest. It's a lot of things.
Okay, back to the point.
So, yeah, the dwarves. They're doing great. It says, the power of Moria endured throughout the dark years and the dominion of Sauron. For though Eregion was destroyed and the gates of Moria were shut, the halls of Khazad-dûm were too deep and strong and filled with a people too numerous and valiant for Sauron to conquer from without. Even though we've joked a lot about the dwarves being this forgotten stepchild, Tolkien still writes this really commendable trait into them that they cannot be controlled or swayed by Sauron. And that's not something that can be said really of the other races. Elves, Sauron has taken control of in the past, and that's how we ended up with orcs, actually, is the first elves he captured eventually turned into orcs, is how that all happened. Men, we know, men, are easily, what Galadriel says, she has a line like in the first like 5-minute prologue of the movies where it's like, but men's hearts are easily corrupted or something like that. But dwarves are not something that Sauron can control. Unfortunately, there was another evil and darkness that did lead to their, I won't say downfall, but significant diaspora. Is that the word? Let me look up this word.
Why not?
Isn't diaspora
like the African diaspora?
Diaspora. The dispersion or spread of a people from their original homeland. Oh my God.
Wow, look at you.
Look at me knowing words.
You get 1 point in race relations today. 1 point.
By the time we get to, again, like I said, this section does jump over the King Durin and Prince Durin that we see in the show. So whatever happens between them, we'll just have to see what happens. Durin the Sixth is in power, and that is when the dwarves, it says, the dwarves delved deep at that time, seeking beneath Baranzabar.
Oh, I read that.
Seeking beneath for Mithril.
Barazimbar. That's what I...
Okay, there we go. Seeking beneath for Mithril, the metal beyond price that was becoming yearly ever harder to win. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorandrim, I could never say that right, but that Thangorandrim was essentially Morgoth's, or Melkor's, evil fortress in the Silmarillion. Terror that had laid hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the West, a Balrog of Morgoth. Durin was slain by it, and the year after Nain the First his son. And then the glory of Moria passed, and its people were destroyed or fled far away. So that is the start of what happens to Moria, and eventually down the line we see, you know, the Fellowship coming into Moria, and like that's how it went from being this.
So, okay, back to, I think just reading this reinforces how Tolkien is literally glued all in the cracks of every single fantasy story ever, you know, because like this isn't I said Finn is a dwarf or fills the role of a dwarf. This sounds like the Mandalorian. This is like,
which aspect?
Number
the
one,
awakening of the Balrog, or like the destruction of this thriving city.
Number one, destruction of a thriving city. Number two, a super sweet metal that they are constantly trying to get.
Okay.
Number three, dwarves are slow to trust. They are of an earthly substance. They are trying to like get back to something that was once greater and more grand than anything they could be than they are than the time that we meet them. You know what I mean? And when we do meet them, they're doing these odd jobs. They're not of the grandeur that they should be or that they want to be. And I think that's a lot of what the Mandalorian, I guess not the Mandalorian, but the Mandalorian culture that this is pulling from. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense? Also, the whole, there's the evil that we're dealing with now, but that evil there was a bigger evil back then that was so big. There was a war so great that you'll never know about unless it's a prequel series. But like, you know what I mean? Like, it's very odd. I don't know. Go ahead.
You're correct in that Tolkien's hands are on everything, whether or not like the creators and in the writer's room of The Mandalorian, someone was like, hey, Tolkien created this thing. Let's see how we can like dive off of that and whatever. Tolkien is a part of almost every aspect of fantasy, which is something you can't say about, I think, really any other writer, you know?
Mm-hmm. So props to you, J.R.R.
I know, right? Sometimes I like to make fun of him, and sometimes I'm like, damn, he did write some good words.
I guess he was a little smart, but whatever. Go ahead.
After the destruction of Moria, people are either, the dwarves either have died as a result or they have fled. And they, let's see, Thrain the First, who is Durin the Sixth grandson. He is now leader of this family of dwarves, and he establishes Erebor in the Lonely Mountain. And this is the city that in The Hobbit, the Thorin and the dwarves and Bilbo are trying to take back from Smaug. So they establish the city Erebor, and in it he finds the great jewel, the Arkenstone, heart of the mountain. So these are things that like readers of The Hobbit, watchers of The Hobbit were familiar with these things. And then, kind of to my surprise, I didn't know this, Thorin, his son, when he becomes king, he departs to the Grey Mountains, where other members of Durin's folk have been gathering. Mm-hmm. And for a while, they stay there for several generations. But this is also very dangerous land because there are dragons there. And eventually there are battles, and they are forced to leave once again. And so they get split up at that point, where the king at that point gets killed. And his two sons, one of them, his oldest, who is like now the king of, who is now the leader, takes people back to Erebor. And then his other son goes to the Iron Hills. And that is how we get this in The Hobbit again, how we have this other army of dwarves that show up from the Iron Hills. I was always confused about well, wait a minute, why how did they end up there, but they're all still a part of the same family? So this is how that happens. Anyway, now they are back in Erebor, and Thror is the leader. So this is actually Thorin's grandfather. I didn't realize that you're reading The Hobbit, you're watching The Hobbit, and they're making Erebor out to be this really fantastic city that it's this was our second home after Moria was destroyed. But not really. They were only there for 2 generations, because there was the first king after they left Moria. Mm-hmm. And then the next leader, they went to the Grey Mountains, and they stayed there longer than they stayed in Erebor, which I just find so fascinating.
I feel like it's one of those things where you ever have something that means something so much to you as a kid, and then you grow up and you tell your parents about this great special moment that changed your brain chemistry, and they're like, no, oh, that was just a throwaway line or something, or I have grandmother's secret recipe. This is my grandmother made it every single Sunday, and then your mom's like, she got that from a Betty Crocker box. What are you talking about? It's just cinnamon. You just add cinnamon,
it's just the recipe on the back of the chocolate chip package.
Yeah. But to you, it was grandma's special cookies. Yeah. I think it's the same situation here. You know what I mean?
Yes, totally. They revive Erebor and get it to a really prosperous point. They're doing great. They have, it says they have a friendship of all men, and they're heavily connected still to their kin in the Iron Hills, which I think is great, because it's not there was this battle in the Grey Mountains and the two brothers were fighting about where to go, and then they had this terrible split. It was just no, some people went over here and some people went over there, but we're still, we're still connected with them. Mm-hmm. So things are going too good for the dwarves at this point.
It always is.
It always is, right? So the rumor of the wealth of Erebor spread abroad and reached the ears of the dragons. And at last, Smaug the Golden, greatest of the dragons of his day, arose and without warning came against King Thror and descended on the mountain in flames. Interesting to note that it's Smaug the Golden, but I feel like in every visual adaptation, he's red.
Oh, another instance where I guess the lore of Tolkien is permeated. It's Smaug is the dragon. There is no I guess more popular dragon than Smaug. Is there a more popular dragon than Smaug?
I suppose there are one or two. If we're talking about in general fantasy pop culture. Mm-hmm. Smaug is the dragon. If you're talking specifically within the Tolkien world, there are, I don't remember, but that's the thing, I don't remember their names or the specific instances.
It's Smaug,
but there are one or two dragons in, Glaurung. That's a name of a dragon. There are a few instances.
Like a Tolkien name generator.
Yeah. There are a few other instances of really big and mighty dragons in the Silmarillion and the war against Melkor, and some characters who was he's the slayer of blah blah blah, Mm-hmm. Smaug, I would say, is probably the most well-known dragon, aside
ever.
from what are some other dragons that are more
You
famous?
can't even Toothless? Nah,
I'm thinking,
it doesn't even come close.
The dragons from Dragon Tales.
You don't even know their names. There's blue and pinky and purple and green.
I feel like one of them was named Cassie, and I know the big blue one was named
Or lame.
Anyway, Smaug comes to Erebor and destroys it. This is so sad. Like, Tolkien's descriptions here are so vivid, and like the way that he is painting this like generational trauma that we are seeing be established within the dwarves, you know, where their homes are constantly being ravaged by these like forces of darkness. It says they went away south with their family into long and homeless wandering. Oh, that long and homeless wandering is so sad and devastating for the dwarves, that like they were once this really great people and now they've diminished into wanderers, you know?
I guess this is a great time to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe J.R.R. Tolkien took a lot of Jewish history and Jewish culture and melded that with the dwarves, right? And I mean, I guess as anyone who read the Bible, you know, there is a sense of the Jewish people trying to live and being like ravaged by something greater, bigger,
and like constantly facing persecution
of like, you know, whether it's like the Pharaoh or anything other, or like the World War things that were happening in World War II that we could talk about at another time, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Then we get into this really interesting note that we will return to in just a minute. I say just a minute. It'll probably be like an hour. Yeah. Here they are now, again, homeless and wandering. King Thror, gives to his son Thrain the last of the 7 rings. And I read this and was very confused.
Wait a minute.
I thought it is interesting because it does kind of just like skip over like, well, wait a minute. Then again, I guess this would be accurate. Like, would Gimli have known when the dwarves were given rings of power and by whom, and, you know?
Yeah.
So Gimli wouldn't have known any of that. Anyway, so I thought that the dwarven rings were either destroyed or taken by Sauron, but then there's this mention of the last of the 7 rings and it being handed
to the
over.
other rings. What happened
We'll find out. So everyone remember that note, and we'll come back to it in just a bit. King Thror, he gives it to Thrain, who is Thorin's father, and he is like, I'm the king of nothing now, basically, so I'm gonna go off and do my own thing. It says he went away with one old companion only called Nar. It is my headcanon that Nar and Thror were in love and they're a couple, but like they're of the older generation, so it's like, oh yeah, it's grandma's friend that she's also been roommates with for the last 50 years, and she comes on all of our vacations, and she always is our grandma's +1 to all of the family events. But yeah, they're just friends. And there's a TikTok sound, actually, I think it's like, in history, we'll say they were platonic friends or something.
This gal's being pals.
Yeah. Anyway, they head off, and with this, Thror says, the passing over the ring, he says, "This may prove the foundation of new fortune for you, though it seems unlikely, but it needs gold to breed gold." So again, remember that. And Thrain's like, "What are we going to do? Do you think we'll ever go back to Erebor?" And Thror says, "No, this is not." He's basically like, "That's your problem now." Bye.
Damn.
He says, "Our vengeance on Smaug I bequeath to you and your sons." But he's old now. And it says he was a little crazed, perhaps with age and misfortune, and long brooding on the splendor of Moria in his forefathers' days, which you've brought up. about the dwarves always holding something in high regard, wanting to get back to that. Or the ring, it may be, was turning to evil now that its master was awake, driving him to folly and destruction. So for whatever the reason, they don't know why, Thror and Nar go to Moria. And Nar stands outside and Thror goes inside. And after a while, Nar hears a horn and he hears some shouting, and then all of a sudden a body is flung out. And he hears a taunting voice from an orc telling him that he is the messenger now and to come forth and look. And the orc says, this is what happens to thieves and beggars who try to come back into Moria. Like, tell them my name. It is written on his face. And so Nar goes over and he flips over the body of Thror. Then Nar turned the head and saw branded on the brow in dwarf runes so that he could read the name Azog. That, I was like, damn, that's like...
hardcore.
That's really harsh. That's really hard. And like, it gets harsher. And that's why I was like, Tolkien really, it's not that he did the dwarves dirty, but he put them through a lot, you know?
It's rough.
They are a traumatized people.
Too traumatized. What was the point? What was the reason? I mean, like...
what was the reason?
Has there ever been a more colder thing in the history of Lord of the Rings? Like, damn.
Yes,
like,
but...
really? I put this in your people's own tongue so you can read it. I put, like, could you imagine if someone
it's pretty cold. Yeah,
tattooed their name on your friend's dead body? Yeah. Ooh, that's rough. That's fighting words.
I think the beginning of the Battle of Pelennor Fields against Minas Tirith, the other side kicks it off by catapulting the severed heads of the army that went to attack on Osgiliath. I think that's pretty harsh. That one always sticks out in my brain. That one's like, damn, that's rough, buddy. Anyway, so they throw this like bag of like cheap coins back at Nar to kind of like taunt him.
Racist.
And he flees and brings word back to Thrain. And so everyone's upset, obviously. They're like, we have to, you know, avenge King Thror. We have to take back our city. Let's do this. So they rally all of the dwarves that are like still alive, even dwarves from other families outside of Durin's folk, and they start pillaging and sacking all of the strongholds of the orcs as they are like making their way up to Moria again. And then they have this huge battle. It's called the Battle of Azan-Nulin Bazaar.
Yeah, sure.
As in Nulin, but yeah.
I pronounced it in my head as Azunabulabar. I'm just kidding. Azanul Bazaar. Azanul Bazaar. Like two words but smushed together. You know what I mean?
That's what a lot of Tolkien is a lot of words smushed together in a one word, you know?
Doom. You know what I mean? Got kind of like, I guess, take cadence to it.
And it says, at the memory of which the orcs still shudder and the dwarves weep. So you read that line at the beginning of this description and you're like, damn, this is going to be heavy. And it is. It's rough. It's rough. They're battling back and forth. Sometimes the dwarves are winning and sometimes the orcs are winning. And then it says the people of the Iron Hills turned the day, just like they did in Battle of Five Armies. And so they come out, and then their leader stands outside the gate and says, Azog, if you are in, come out. Or is the play in the valley too rough? So I love that like taunting element, this like bit of fun that we also see carried through to Dane, the leader of the Iron Hills. In we really see that come out in the Battle of Five Armies movies, where I'm pretty sure he says, he doesn't use a swear word, but like for Tolkien movies, he basically says like a profanity. Ooh. And everyone was like, oh dang, but like that's his personality, you know? You look back at his father and you're like, dang. Azog comes forth, and Azog and Nain have this battle, but Nain has been battling like a lot and he's tired, and Azog is like fresh and he's been inside resting. And so Nain is killed.
I mean, it's Azog. Wait, this is the pale orc, right?
Yeah, so this is where there's some departure. Yeah, we'll get back to that in a minute. Then Nain's son Dane Ironfoot jumps up and avenges his father and kills Azog.
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Wait, in pieces.
In pieces.
Ooh, I'm sorry.
At this point, the rest of the orcs, they either run away or they're killed. And so they have won this battle. Sorry, I do just want to bring up real quick. There was a footnote that I read it and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. It's talking about Thrain and Thorin in the battle. Mm-hmm. And the footnote says about Thorin, it is said that Thorin's shield was cloven and he cast it away, and he hewed off with his axe a branch of an oak and held it in his left hand to ward off the strokes of his foes, or to wield as a club. In this way, he got his name. And that's why he's Thorin Oakenshield.
You didn't know that?
I never made that connection. And this is a detail that they did put in the movie.
Yeah.
And I just never thought about it.
That's like his whole shtick. Thorin Oakenshield. The whole thing.
I didn't.
The whole time.
Look. The whole time. Anyway, yeah. So I'm dumb and I didn't realize that. And I literally just went like, for the longest time when I read that. They won this battle, but it was really at a great cost to them. This was another thing that I was like, damn, that's hardcore. They took the head of Azog and thrust into its mouth the purse of small money, and then they set it on a stake. So that little bag of money that was like thrown at Nar as he ran from Moria, they shoved it in Azog's decapitated head.
That's kind of hardcore.
For display. I was like, the dwarves do not mess around. They don't mess around.
Where is this energy any other time in the story? Where was this the whole time?
The thing is that it's always there. Tolkien just didn't write about it. Uh-huh. King Thrain is like, he's really feeling good about this. But the rest of the people are like, bro, look around. We won, but at what cost? So many of our people are dead. It says, we have taken vengeance, but it is not sweet. And then there are other people who are saying, Khazad-dûm was not our father's house. So there are people who are in this battle who are like, this isn't even our, not my circus, not my monkeys kind of a thing. But the dwarves, I guess, I think that also does say a lot about them, that even though it's not their circus and it's not their monkeys, they were like, we're going to come and back you up.
It saddens me that like, even in this text, you know what I mean? Like the dwarves won and they still haven't won. It's still not a good victory. Can they catch a break? I know
they can't. They cannot catch a break. It's really beautiful. It says that like of their dead, because they don't have time to build tombs and bury their dead in the way that they customarily do. So they take all of the like weapons and everything off of the bodies because they don't want any enemies to come and get them. And they burn the rest of their bodies. And a footnote says that like this was it was a big deal if dwarves had to burn their dead, because that is not how they treat their dead. That is not what they do. And it says that in years on, a dwarf would say like of a family member, he was a burned dwarf, as like a sign of pride, of like they were in this insane battle and like that was really important and they were brave, but we lost them. Dane, they go back to the Iron Hills, and Thrain is still kind of like filled with this, like fury and fire within him. And he says to Thorin, he's like, so what should we do? Like, and Thorin's like, I'm with you. Let's go, let's keep on keeping on. Dane says to like Thrain and Thorin that don't like, yeah, we won this battle, but I would not go back into Moria. You cannot retake it and like build it back up as your new home, because Durin's Bane is still in there. It says, the world must change and some other power than ours must come before Durin's folk walk again in Moria. Then, I don't know, 100 years in the future, a hobbit drops a rock down a well, awakens Durin's Bane, and then Gandalf does his thing, and then becomes Gandalf the White.
I have a question. So,
Yes.
This is Pippin hearing this from Gimli. But yet, he still wanted to go through Moria.
So this is all being recorded after the War of the Ring.
So maybe you found out, did some reading.
So this is in their like retirement age, you know, like they've done this intense battle.
Went to therapy, whole 9 yards.
Hopefully went to therapy. Then the dwarves go to Dunland, and they build up things and they prosper, and like they're doing well as like blacksmiths and everything, but it's not the same. They're not in the same glory that they know they could be in. As Thror had said when he gave the ring to Thrain, the ring needs gold to breed gold. So even though they're forging like iron and weapons and everything, there's nothing the ring is going to do for them now to help them build up that glory.
I mean, I get. So the ring doesn't even matter? It didn't like. Oh.
Well,
okay.
It did. So let's talk about
matter.
That. Let's talk about that. It used to. At this moment in time, it's not helping them. So the ring, again, like I said, as I first read that the seventh ring was like passed on, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I thought that like all of the rings were destroyed or taken. It says it was believed by the dwarves of Durin's folk to be the first of the 7 that was forged. And they say it was given to the king of Khazad-dûm, Durin III, who is King Durin in the Rings of Power show. So that lines up with like our timeline of the Rings of Power show. Like the rings are being forged at the same time that Durin III is king. So like we can certainly see a future with the show where King Durin III is given a ring of power, you know? It says given a ring by the elven smiths themselves and not by Sauron, though doubtless his evil power was in it since he had aided in the forging of all the 7. So there's kind of these 2 histories of the dwarven rings. And one of them, I think the history and the story that is more widely told or more widely quote unquote known is that the 7 rings were forged by Sauron and given to the dwarves. Then later on, they were either destroyed or taken back by Sauron because Sauron realizes, it says, the dwarves, they were made in their beginning of a kind to resist most steadfastly any domination. Though they could be slain or broken, they could not be reduced to shadows enslaved to other will. And for the same reason, their lives were not affected by any ring to live either longer or shorter. All the more did Sauron hate the possessors and desire to dispossess them. I don't remember. I was talking about like the right. What happened to the dwarven rings? So Sauron gave them the rings, expecting to be able to control them. And when that didn't happen, he got mad. And through a variety of ways, his forces, like dark forces, whatever, attacked. And Sauron was either able to take back the rings or the rings were destroyed. Except for, theoretically, this 7th ring. This is something that I think is like a story, is a legend or potential folklore among the dwarves, among Durin's folk, as Gimli is relaying this information later on to be like, so yeah, the 7 rings were eventually, in one way or another, the dwarves were no longer in possession of the 7 rings. But my, great-great-grandfather, or how, I don't know the exact whatever, he's saying that, no, there was one of the rings that was still retained by Durin's folk and passed from king to king. And eventually, Thror passed it on to Thrain.
Yeah. A lot of thrusts.
Yeah, lots of that. Whether or not this is true, we don't know. I think that's super interesting. So what ended up happening is that Thrain has, in the aftermath of this battle at Moria against Azog is killed, all that stuff. He is growing ever more restless and discontented. It says the lust of gold was ever in his mind, because here they are trying to rebuild after this battle. His father Thror said it needs gold to breed gold. He's like, okay, maybe it's our time now to take back Erebor. Maybe it's our time to get us back to greater glory. So he and a company of people set out. This company includes, by the way, Balin and Dwalin, who are two of the dwarves.
We know them.
From The Hobbit.
Oh.
So they set out on this quest that is never really clear. Maybe it was clear at the time among everyone else about like, yeah, this is the plan. But as Gimli knows, he doesn't understand truly what he was setting out to do. So they're in Mirkwood, and they fall asleep, and the next day they wake up and they never find Thrain again. Only long after was it learned that Thrain had been taken alive and brought to the pits of Dol Guldur. There he was tormented, and the ring was taken from him, and there at last he died. So this is one version of events of the history of one of the dwarven rings. Of one of them survived and remained within the possession of dwarves and was passed down until eventually it was taken back by Sauron. And I think this is going to be really interesting to see what the show decides. What are they going to share and tell? Is it going to be, because they've already they've really veered off course of the Rings of Power creation itself. The Dwarven Rings, I think, will be very interesting to see how the show tackles, because we have these two kind of like competing histories of what happened to the Dwarven Rings, where one of them survived long enough, and that possibly explains this like greediness that was within Durin's folk and like these evil events that kept following them, you know? And I think it's not so much in the Hobbit book, but in the Hobbit movies, the Arkenstone is really what drives that madness and the greed behind the kings. But I think it's way more compelling if it was actually one of the rings.
Mary Clay, you busted it open. You've solved the mystery. Okay.
I don't know if I've solved it so much as I think more interesting.
So more interesting than the Arkenstone. So okay. So if the ring has been following them, does it offer any control? Not control, but like if you wear it and you're in front of the Balrog, is the Balrog gonna be like, oh yeah, you're Sauron's homies? You know what I mean?
No. The dwarves with the rings are specifically not Sauron's homies, you know? Because they're not under his dominion. Okay, so it says, the only power over them that the rings wielded was to inflame their hearts with the greed of gold and precious things, so that if they lacked them, all other goods seemed profitless, and they were filled with wrath and desire for vengeance on all who deprived them. Okay, so in my head, the dwarves who have the rings, I think that explains why they were so prosperous, because there's always this push within them, greed, lust for gold, whatever you want to call it, this drive within them to keep digging, like keep making things, keep doing better, keep making things greater and greater and greater. And that's also what pushed them to digging for mithril, even when they, okay, brain blast, ready.
You broke it open. Okay.
So in the show,
yes,
King Durin is very much against the idea of mining for mithril. He's like, it's dangerous. There have been a lot of collapses. There's a lot of reasons that he has for leaving mithril alone and leaving the deeper mountains be. And you see them in one of the episodes, whatever Elrond and Durin were mining, you see them later like patching it up. because they're like, we're not touching that. And they don't even know yet that the Balrog is underneath that. But if the show decides to go by this history that the Elven Lords gave to Durin III, the first dwarven ring, and the ring awakens this greed, that could very easily explain, because as it stands right now, it's kind of like, well, wait a minute, how did the dwarves go from, no, we're not mining mithril, we're leaving it alone, to, delve too greedily and too deeply and awaken the Balrog? How do we go from point A to point B? And I think if we see one of the Elven Lords give King Durin III a ring, that would be an explanation for why there's this change and why they awaken the Balrog. And then that goes again down the line where they get to Erebor, but the next king is like, I don't want this. This isn't good enough. Let me go try and do something else. And then back in Erebor, they are so prosperous that a dragon hears about it and is like, I'm coming to get that. And that's why King Thror tried to go back to Moria with his platonic friend Nar. And take back Moria. And that's why Thrain, who has the ring and is the last possessor of the ring, was so, after the battle, they've lost all of these people. There's been so much destruction, but he still views it as somewhat of a victory. And yet he still wants more. And it's because of the ring.
Wow.
That was a lot of talking, I realized.
No. Okay. But for real though, like, I was like connecting the dots. And then you would say, when I was thinking, I'm like, oh, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you solved it. J.R.R. Tolkien, that's what he was talking about.
Yeah. So I think that is I think it would be more interesting for the Rings of Power people to choose this version of history that the dwarves are telling, that instead of all of the rings being destroyed or taken, there was one that survived and was passed down up until King Thrain. Unfortunately, this is where it's going to get frustrating watching the show, because if they don't do that, I'm going to be sitting here being like, I have a better version of the story.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that.
Just like I thought with Halbrand.
Oh,
where I was like, Halbrand is going to be the king of the dead army in Return of the King. Yeah. And he is this king and he's going to return to his people and he's going to, it's like a failed Aragorn story, you know? Anyway, I think it would be really compelling, especially since the show is building up this friendship between Elrond and Prince Durin. I think it would be compelling if Elrond made a case for them to make a dwarven ring. Or maybe the dwarves find out, you know, through Prince Durin, who finds out through Elrond that there are these elven rings, and the dwarves are like, well, we want one too. You know, and they advocate for themselves to have a dwarven ring of power. And that's how King Durin gets a ring. And then we can proceed into, you know, mining Mithril, the Balrog, all this other stuff that happens with their history. Again, just, it's always hard when you're watching shows. I would say it's harder for TV shows than movies, because movies, you go in, you sit down and you watch it unfold and then that's it. Yeah, whereas TV shows, you have time in between each episode, in between each season to be like, this is how I want this to play out. I've now like established this is what I want to happen, and I will be very disappointed, unfortunately, if it doesn't.
Don't do that. Don't do that, because
maybe I won't be disappointed. You're right. Maybe I won't be disappointed if this doesn't happen, because maybe something different and cooler will happen.
Yeah,
you know?
Allow yourself. I encourage you to allow yourself to be surprised, because this is think about it this way. You are doing the exact same thing that everyone did in 1999 when they saw The Phantom Menace.
What and what was that?
Oh wait, that's right. Oh, this is huge. Okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
not knowing Star Wars.
Long story short. Between the last Return of the Jedi and episode 1, The Phantom Menace, there was a huge gap. And between that gap, people made stories of what, like, happened in between? Like, what were the prequels? Like, how did Darth Vader become this? You know what I mean? How did the Clone Wars happen? What was Obi-Wan like? This, that, and the other. You know what I mean? Had all these theories about what could have happened and what should happen, right? And then when we got there and it was drastically different, quality aside, you know, yes, the quality of those films could have been better. I don't think that's like a unpopular opinion. Mm-hmm. Yes. People had built up this image of things that they should happen instead of accepting the story for what it was. And people like me, who were kids at the time, who watched Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, and now with Star Wars, like, that's Star Wars to my generation of people. Mm-hmm. Like, we hold those films and the Clone Wars and Anakin and all this stuff so deeply, you know what I mean? Because that's what was presented in front of us. You know what I mean? We took them for what they are. You know, so yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're like, Rings of Power didn't do X, Y, Z, you know what I mean? Like, just, I encourage you.
You're correct. Yeah.
You know what I mean? The same thing happened with Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. Luke Skywalker wouldn't do that.
I mean,
you know what I mean? This
is exactly that. I appreciate your perspective because you have allowed me to open my mind. Yeah. Because this is exactly why there are so many people who just outright say, oh, Rings of Power is trash, blah, 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 blah. Because they did exactly what I was saying and doing.
You fell into the trap.
Where in their mind, they were like, this is what I want to happen, and if it doesn't happen, it's bad.
Exactly.
And so you're correct that I should have a more, this is what I want to happen, and this is what I predict to happen, and what I think will be compelling. If it doesn't happen, I will say I'll be disappointed, but that doesn't mean that something else couldn't happen that is still equally compelling. Mm-hmm. You know, allow yourself those moments to be like, oh, I'm sad that what I want to happen and what I thought was going to happen didn't. Give yourself that time to recognize that and then let it go and move on and talk and think critically about what did happen.
You sound like a Jedi, Mary Clay. Oh, I can't wait for you to watch Star Wars.
I know all about Jedis. You know me. Hello.
Okay, let's finish this up.
Let's finish it up. Okay, yeah. That's what to wrap those thoughts up, that's what I think and hope will happen for Rings of Power, but if it doesn't, I will keep my mind open to what does happen. Where even were we with this story? This is going to be so disjointed. Okay. Thrain is taken by Sauron. The ring is also taken, and Thorin is now the king. So this is where the events of The Hobbit really kick off. Mm-hmm. I love the way that Tolkien describes this like passion and anger that is like slowly growing within Thorin over the years. The embers in the heart of Thorin grew hot again as he brooded on the wrongs of his house and the vengeance upon the dragon that he had inherited. He thought of weapons and armies and alliances as his great hammer rang in his forge. But the armies were dispersed and the alliances broken, and the axes of his people were few. And a great anger without hope burned him as he smote the red iron on the anvil. So descriptive. I can very clearly see how he came to be the Thorin that we see in The Hobbit, where he's working endlessly. And like, as he's doing this, you know, maybe it's kind of when you get to a certain level, maybe it's sometimes a mindless activity of like blacksmithing and all this stuff that they're doing, where he has this time to just be alone with his thoughts. And he's just thinking about the history of his fathers, the dragon, Erebor, battles that like maybe if he had done something differently, other things would have happened. I can see how all of that like empowers within himself a desire for more, a desire for change. Then comes a chance meeting, it says, between Gandalf and Thorin. And it says, this meeting changed all the fortunes of the House of Durin and led to other and greater ends. I love that because so really, if you think about it, the ring could not be destroyed if it weren't for the dwarves.
Ooh.
Because Thorin had to meet Gandalf to set off on this quest with Bilbo. For Bilbo to end up with the ring, for the ring to end up with Frodo and, a hobbit, and for it to be realized that a hobbit is the only one who can take the ring to Mordor, and for it to later, be destroyed. And I love that domino effect. It's so great to look at these dominoes being laid up that, like, if it hadn't been for this, and Gandalf says it later in this section too, that this meeting was so important for so many other things in that were to come, and they would have no idea.
It's kind of like how Stephenie Meyer eventually led to the fall of Ellen DeGeneres.
Yes.
Yeah, Stephenie Meyer wrote Twilight. That became someone else wrote a fan fiction of Twilight, but with like sexiness in it and stuff like that. That was called 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey then gets turned into a movie starring Dakota Johnson, and which then leads to Dakota Johnson being on Ellen and being like, you didn't invite me to your birthday.
Dang, I love all those dominoes.
All thanks to Dwarves and Twilight. That's the title of this episode.
Okay, so Thorin and Gandalf both end up in Bree on the same evening, and Gandalf is sitting there thinking about Sauron, because at this point he knows that Sauron is on the rise, that he's growing in power, and he also knows that kind of nearby, not that far off, is this great dragon in the Lonely Mountain, and he's worried about what Sauron is going to do. He's worried if he gets control of that dragon, what could happen. And so he's sitting here having these thoughts, and then Thorin walks in. He's been, journeying and doing stuff, and he walks in for the night, and he sees Gandalf, and he has heard tales and knows of Gandalf the Grey and recognizes him, and he walks up and says, like, "Hi, I'm Thorin. Nice to meet you." And Gandalf is like, "How incredible that you are here right now, because I was just thinking about Erebor and about your people and what we could do." And that's when they come up with this plan. And it says, "The story is told elsewhere." It does this several times in the appendix where there are events that are detailed in, The Lord of the Rings or in The Hobbit, and it just says, "Of this much is told elsewhere." And it's like, book. We're not going to go into the details now. You can read something else if you want to.
Look at J.R.R. Tolkien plugging his own work.
Really? Yeah, exactly.
Like, shameless plug, The Hobbit, one of the best-selling novels of all time.
Exactly. Yeah. See also The Hobbit, the thing that launched the fantasy genre, like.
No big deal. It's casually.
The Battle of Five Armies happens. They take back Erebor. Yay. Thorin and his nephews, Keely and Feely, die. And that is the end. Maybe not the end, but that is like... No, it is like the end of the direct line of like Durin's folk, because then his cousin Dane Ironfoot, who killed Azog, becomes the king. This is different from how it's portrayed in the Hobbit trilogy, where Azog is alive in the Hobbit movies, and like he is the main big baddie. In the book, it is his son Bolg, who I don't even think Bolg is killed, if I remember, when they go into Goblin Town. Because at that point, as Tolkien was writing The Hobbit, Goblin was like later Orc. Like those are they're one and the same, essentially.
Really?
So in the book, the dwarves, they get taken into Goblin Town, and that results in the death of Bolg, Azog's son. And then the orcs / goblins are so enraged by this that they later attack Erebor and the dwarves. So all of that is portrayed differently in the movie. Lots of things portrayed differently. What I found interesting, it notes here that in that summer of the same year, Gandalf had at last prevailed upon Saruman and the White Council to attack Dol Guldur, and Sauron retreated and went to Mordor. And that is what happens in the Hobbit trilogy. It's this like it's so funny because it's one sentence, this one detail that they then turn into like an entire side plot in the Lord of the Rings, in the Hobbit trilogy. That at the time that I was watching it and had not yet read this, I was like, they made all of this up. What is all of this nonsense? Yeah. Come to find out, it is here in the appendices.
Wow. Okay, I have a question. What happened to Radagast? He kind of dipped out after these movies.
I know, damn, right? Man. I don't know.
Bro, like, yeah, one, two.
That's the question. Where's Radagast during, the War of the Ring? Radagast.
He's like, screw this. I'm going where the blue wizards are.
Honestly, he might have. Let's see. The intro on the Lord of the Rings wiki says, it keeps... You know how you open a web page and then like it'll keep moving things down as more ads populate,
Gotta get that ad block.
Anyway, Radagast mainly concerned himself with the well-being of the plant and animal worlds and thus did not participate heavily in the War of the Ring.
Lame.
So that's just the brief description that he didn't want to, I guess.
I guess? What a jerk.
Radagast. Oh, that's right. I do remember in a previous part in the appendix, it does mention that Saruman at the time that like he's not like fully evil yet. He's kind of getting there. Saruman asks Radagast to borrow some of his birds so that Saruman explains it. Hey, can I have some of your birds so that I can spy on Sauron and our enemies and try to locate and try to find the One Ring? And Radagast is like, sure, because he has no reason to believe at that point that Saruman would do something otherwise. And then instead, eventually he uses the birds as his spies to spy on. And that's why in Fellowship of the Ring, there's that one scene where the Fellowship is like having a good time, just relaxing for once. And then the birds come over and Gandalf goes, spies sent from Saruman. So forget Radagast. Where were we? That's right. Gandalf, they had this battle against Sauron in Dol Guldur. That part of the Hobbit trilogy is actually lore accurate.
Thank you, Peter.
As ridiculous as it was portrayed, I just always have this one image in my head where Galadriel, she goes like ring mode and she starts to use her elven ring and she looks like the girl in the well from
The Ring.
Yeah. And then like she also like Gandalf has like passed out and is almost dying and she just like deadlifts like no problem, just like carries him away. Anyway, so King Dane he's Durin's folk leader, all of that. And you're kind of like, it is interesting, like what were the rest of the dwarves doing during the War of the Ring? Because we don't see that in the Lord of the Rings. After the ring is destroyed, I imagine they're all hanging out in Minas Tirith, healing, resting up. They're waiting for like the coronation to happen. They're having a good time, just like being pals and not like running from Nazgul, Gandalf said afterwards to Frodo and Gimli, he is relaying this news that King Dane has died in the battle that they were fighting. And it's so funny. He says, yet things might have gone far otherwise and far worse. When you think of the great battle of the Pelennor, do not forget the battles in Dale and the valor of Durin's folk. Which is so funny because this is the very first time I'm ever hearing of this, where he specifically says like, yes, we did all of this stuff, but we also need to remember our brothers in arms over in Dale, what the dwarves did. We can't forget what they did too, because they were very valiant in this larger war against Sauron. And then it's like tucked away here in the appendices.
Dang, like what were they? You know what? Never mind. I know what happened. They were forgotten. And he says that had they not been fighting off Sauron's forces up
by, I think they were like up by the Lonely Mountains. They're up by Dale, which is that's right. Dale was the town by Erebor and by the Lonely Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So they were in that area. I think it says that had they not stopped Sauron's forces there, they could have gone on to take Rivendell. It says that there might be no queen in Gondor. I'm assuming he's saying like Arwen could have been killed in Rivendell if the dwarves had not stopped Sauron's forces then. And he says this line, which again goes back to like that domino thing that we were talking about. We might now hope to return from the victory here only to ruin and ash, but that has been averted because I met Thorin Oakenshield one evening on the edge of spring in Bree. A chance meeting, as we say in Middle Earth.
Beautiful.
It's I love that kind of moment of Gandalf being a little bit sentimental, being like, it's really bonkers to think that if Thorin and I hadn't met in Bree, entirely different things could have happened.
What do you think would happen?
I don't think that the dwarves would have successfully taken back Erebor.
What?
Because Gandalf had this big plan hatched that involved a hobbit. Mm-hmm. And if they hadn't, connected some dots together, I think possibly Thorin, it mentioned that like the reason he was in Bree is because it was like wherever he was, it was like on the way to Erebor. But again, I'm not going to worry too much about geography and maps. Anyway, it mentioned that like he was thinking about Erebor and his like his forefathers' homes and everything. Mm-hmm. And this anger without hope that was building inside of him, I think eventually he might have led a very small attack against Smaug. And I think they all would have died.
Damn. Okay, that's fair. I know I talked about this the last time I was here, but like if Gandalf had been there in the Smaug fight, he would have turned the Gandalf the White then. He would have done the sacrifice play.
It's possible.
The whole Balrog thing just would have happened with Smaug. I feel like that would have happened.
I think that's possible. Yeah. Really incredible history and domino effect of the dwarves. Then there's a brief little paragraph about the dwarven women.
Wow.
It literally says Dis, which is just so funny. Dis was the daughter of Thrain II. So this is Thorin's sister and the mother of Keely and Feely. She's the only dwarf woman named in these histories. So
was Gimli sexist when he's retelling this, or was J.R. Tolkien even more sexist?
It could have been Gimli,
Didn't Gimli say, oh, women have beards too, so it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny because the way that it's described that like, oh, there are so few dwarf women, a lot of them look like men. This has given to the foolish opinion among men that there are no dwarf women and that dwarves grow out of stone. And like this little part is almost said like word for word by Gimli in the movie when they're on the way to Helm's Deep. I think that's fun that like they took this almost word for word. It does mention though, however, thankfully that the dwarven women are not forced to marry. It says that dwarves are like serial monogamers.
Monogamous? Serial monogamous.
Yeah. Monogamous.
Like they're penguins.
Yeah, they mate for life. They have one love, and that's who they're with for the rest of their lives, essentially. However, dwarven women were not like forced to marry simply for the sake of like procreation. That a lot of times, there are a lot of men who didn't marry simply because they never fell in love with someone, because they went off to battle, they had other focuses, and same with the women, that a lot of times they were not interested. It also says that sometimes they fell in love with a man, but that man was in love with someone else. Ooh. And they just never, that unrequited love, because they mate for life, they're only in love with one person, they just never remarried. So I appreciate there's that intense relief that I as a woman felt reading this, that they were not forced to marry simply for the sake of keeping the dwarven line going. And then we move on to Gimli's history after the Ring is destroyed. he is like highly renowned among the dwarves, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes a great elven friend because he is so close in friendship with Legolas, and also because of his reverence for the Lady Galadriel. He brought part of the dwarven folk of Erebor down to the Glittering Caves and becomes Lord of the Glittering Caves there. I love this. Like, I can totally imagine, like, Legolas and Gimli are working for their people, bringing them out into, you know, into new places to thrive and live more, you know, beautiful lives now that there's not this threat of darkness, because Legolas also brings out some of the elves into Ithilien. And so now you have a lot more of like mingling of the races. And it's not so separate. It's not the dwarves are in hiding. It's not, oh, well, the elves are only in Rivendell and they're only in Lorien and Mirkwood. It's everyone is now coexisting together really peacefully. Then we get sad. Things get sad because Aragorn dies and Legolas at this point decides, okay, well, all of my friends are dead. Have you seen that?
Yes, the dinosaur thing.
The dinosaur, all my friends are dead.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So this is when he decides that this is his time to get on a ship and go to the Undying Lands. It says, here follows one of the last notes in the Red Book. And I'm really interested to see, like, who wrote this. I maybe should go back. I think I'll see in the next section with the timeline whether or not, because if Pippin or Merry are writing this, then I guess they could write this. But yeah. I thought that I would assume that Legolas would only go over to the Undying Lands once like all of his friends had also died, aside from Gimli. So I'm like, who's writing this if Merry and Pippin are dead? So maybe we'll find out they're alive too. We have heard tell that Legolas took Gimli, Gloin's son, with him because of their great friendship, greater than any that has been between elf and dwarf. And it is said that Gimli went also out of a desire to see again the beauty of Galadriel. And it may be that she, being mighty among the Eldar, obtained this grace for him. More cannot be said of this matter because they're like, we don't know. Maybe Gimli had to jump ship at Valinor?
Never. There's no way. Zero chance that Gimli would jump ship. But because he can't swim.
Yeah, it's believed. I just love we have heard tell that Legolas took Gimli. So no one knows for certain. But like rumor has it that at the port that Legolas left from, he also had they're like, wow, that's a weird looking elf.
Who's gonna check him?
Unusually short and has a beard. I thought elves can't grow beards. Interesting. Okay. And that is the end of Appendix A.
Wow.
And the end of this recording that both Justin and I...
Look, we made it through. We did it.
We've been working hard to bring this episode to you guys, listeners.
I swear to God, if you cut out right now...
Oh, no.
I swear to God. It's not even... Okay. I swear to God.
It's fine. Literally, listeners, as I'm saying this, Justin has just cut out. Justin, I'm so sorry. Rest in peace. Okay. At this point, I'm going to insert Justin's outro, telling you where you can find him.
Mary Clay, if you're listening to this, I'm going to act like you are outroing me. Hi, you can find me at FreddiesRoommate, wherever toys are sold, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I also have a podcast that's coming out right now all about The Bachelor. It's on Decoding TV with David Jen. It's a pretty good show. It's called Decoding Reality. And me and Deja Talks TV talk about The Bachelor. And I hope that interests you.
That's What I'm Talking About is a proud member of WBNE. If you want to learn more about the network, you can go to WBNE.org. The cover art is by Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at Vaishon Designs. You can get merch for That's What I'm Talking About by going to tpublic.com/user/talkingaboutpod. You can follow the podcast on social media at TalkingAboutPod. And like I mentioned way back at the beginning of this episode, there's also a Facebook group. I'm sorry that it's fallen off of my radar as the host and leader, but it brings my heart joy to see that people are still sharing memes and very interesting points and fun discussions. So you can join the Facebook group as well. All that's linked in the episode description. You can follow me on Twitter and TikTok at MCWattsUp and on Instagram at MCTurnDownForWhat. If you want to support the podcast, you can become a patron. Go to patreon.com/TolkienAboutPod to explore the different tiers and perks that are available. You can become a member of the 11sies tier to get access to bonus content, such as audio that did not make it into the final episode, of which there's probably going to be a lot from this recording because Justin and I always have a great time talking. We get into a lot of really great conversations. We talked a lot about Rings of Power and why people didn't like it and what that means. He is texting me right now in all caps. WTF, ugh, what is happening? Anyway, we had a fun time. I couldn't include all of that in this episode because I wanted the episode to be focused on the dwarves, you know, and that conversation to be the main thread. So if you want to hear more fun stuff between Justin and I, you can become a member of the 11sies tier, or you can become a sponsor of the podcast like Johan. Johan, thank you for your continued support. You're a wonderful person. I appreciate you, and I hope that you are enjoying 2023 so far. This is what we're doing with 2023. We're into the appendices finally. I've been enjoying it, and I hope you are as well. As always, if you like what you're listening to, please make sure to rate and review. So that being said, I don't have Justin here to share parting words with the audience. I will share these parting words that I think if it weren't for the dwarves, the One Ring would never have been destroyed.
As always, long live dwarves.
And that's what I'm talking about.
It's me. It's my internet.
I'm the problem.